Braxcast time once again. This is the 63rd episode of the Braxcast, and this is finally the first slow news week for the Rippaverse in a good long time. I think since the release of Bloodroof #1, I should say the fulfillment of Bloodroof #1, it's been pretty much non-stop, either releases or stuff getting fulfilled. Of course, there was 2 weeks in a row where both the Yaira statue and then the Isom statue were fulfilled week after week. So I had like 2 episodes where I was doing the statues and everything. Of course, started doing Braxcast live because people love the live streams, and also just to cover all the stuff that's going on. Did do Braxcast live again, even though it's just me just rambling. Guys still showed up, had an absolute fantastic show. And I figured, why not use this time where there really isn't much in terms of new collections being released or anything new getting released. We do have Isom Free hitting that $600,000 milestone with 1 week left to go. I think just under a week left to go with Isom #3. We'll see if it hits that 750,000 milestone to get that Dokumon card. Who knows what can happen? It could even hit 1 million in that last week for a big rally, but we'll see. Regardless, it's over 10,000 books sold. It's the conclusion to the ill-advised dark. It's going to be really exciting to see what the Rippaverse does going forward with Isom #3. And what a lot of people want are crossovers. So this episode is going to be all about crossovers. And now Eric's talked about this, and I've talked about this a bit before. It's way too early in the Rippaverse to have some big, grandiose crossover event where we're taking characters from basically all the books, Alpha Core, Yaira, Bloodroof, Gooding, and just smashing them all together in some sort of world-breaking event and then doing it again in 6 months. I think that would set a really bad precedent if they did that at this point in the game, where we don't really have a lot in terms of mature storylines for these characters. Of course, we have Isom 1 and Isom 2. We've got Yaira 1 and Yaira #2, but the fans don't have any #3s in their hands quite yet. This year is going to change that. Of course, we're getting Yaira 3 and Isom #3, but we don't even have Alpha Core #2 yet. We don't even have Horseman and his ongoing series getting off the ground. We've got Welcome to Flores Park, and of course, #1 will be coming out in the summer. That's when the fans will get to read it. But we don't really have any character, I should say, that has a well-established, mature storyline. And in order for there to be an event that's meaningful and has impact, we need to have a good amount of characters that have mature storylines. That's going to be a couple years down the line. I think somewhere around the 5-year mark for the Rippaverse in totality, so probably around 27, 28 is when we can think of having enough of the storylines being mature enough in order to justify that. But I think in that interim, before that occurs, what we can have are crossovers with specific characters. And I think the 2 best characters you can have as a crossover, or I think some of the 2 best characters are definitely going to be Santuan and Shadran. Of course, they rhyme, right? And these are the Dokumon cards, both done by Will Conrad. This is Santuan's is from the very first deck that released alongside Isom #1. Shadran is from the second deck, which released with the Yaira #1 campaign. And not aside from these characters being big bruiser type characters, I did talk about these characters in the first episode of Braxcast Live. I talked about pitting these characters against each other in Catch Street. It was the only Catch Street I've done so far, and I think it's only going to be the only one I've done for a while until we get more in terms of knowledge about these characters with interior comic book appearances. It's a bit too early to pit characters against each other because we know so little about these characters. But I think we know enough about Santuan and Shadran that they could definitely be in a crossover. And one of what makes these characters so interesting to me in terms of a crossover is that, as you know, or if you don't know, both of these characters have a history with Isom. So in Isom #1, it's established that Santuan and Shadran, Santuan and Isom have fought before. Of course, they have a little bit of a about in Club Merc at the beginning of Isom number 1, which Isom very squarely loses, and that leads to his conflict with Yaira. And then later in the book, as part of Isom number 1's climax, he's able to defeat Santuan and really not only bruise him physically, but bruise his ego. He's got a massive ego. And of course, we know in Isom number 2, with Shadron being the reason that Isom quit. Of course, you have Isom, who was doing a hero work back in the day when he was young Isom. And then with Shadron being part of an attack on a school, kills a teenage girl right in front of him. He can't save her, and because of that, he retires from hero work. So both of these characters do not like Isom, and because they have a mutual enemy, they can be friends. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, as the saying goes. And I definitely think Santuan and Shadron would have a reason on that basis to link up together and have a really cool event. And this is a crossover that could happen as part of the next arc for Isom, right? After Isom number 3 happens and the ill-advised arc is concluded, of course, there's going to be a little bit of a break from Isom because Eric July has a lot of other series he's writing. He wants to write Norfolk, he wants to write Sersha, he wants to work on Salvage, and I'm sure other projects down on that we don't even know about yet. So it's going to be a bit of time before Isom number 4. But if Isom number 4 does come when it comes out and it starts a new arc, I think it would be really cool if you had Santuan and Shadron being part of that arc. Now, of course, Shadron could appear in Isom number 3 and he very handily defeats him, that being Isom. And that kind of ruins the chance for that. But I think a really cool thing would be having Santuan and Shadron be part of their or be a team up that happens within the Isom series, because people do like the character of Isom, and I think both these characters together would not only challenge Isom physically, but also mentally as well, because he doesn't have the physical advantage against either Shadron or Santuan, especially them working together. So he'd have to use his brain, he'd have to use everything that he has to really go and bring the smack down to both of these characters. So I think Santuan and Shadron, if I'm going to have to name 2 characters to cross over, that's going to be the best thing to do. And especially it's going to be the best way to do it is within the Isom series. And I think that would be a really good opportunity to characterize all 3 of those characters, that being Isom, Shadron, and Santuan. I think next, and this is something I was talking about, or I was responding to somebody on Twitter, I think the next crossover event, I think 2 characters that can get crossed over is going to be Bloodroof and Yaira. And the reason why I say this is because the supernatural aspects of the Rippaverse are really focusing around these 2 characters. Because Yaira is a very otherworldly being. Of course, we know she's an alien. We know that she has the superpowered origins that go back to her very formative years. Of course, we have those flashbacks with Yashua in Yaira number 2. If I can flip to those parts of the book, if we know that, of course, you've got, Yashua greeting her, but here we go. You see this very much otherworldly, very alien experience that experience that Deborah Carita really does a great job at depicting. They're, of course, speaking their own language, and of course, it's established that Yaira has these powers, but they're not allowed to use them. Of course, you see her and Yashua as children. So this really is indicative of the fact that Yaira is this otherworldly, supernatural being. Of course, she's got the ice power, she's got basically immortality, and of course, she's got, this extreme physical prowess, as does Yashua. If you can see the fact that Yaira is, of course, she's like 6'1" or so, and of course, Yashua towers over her in a very typical, when you take the average man, compare them to the average woman, Yashua is really that fine specimen there, right? And that's, very much indicative of the physical prowess of Yaira's race. So I think having everything that's going on with Yaira as a character and combining that with Bloodroof's supernatural origins. Of course, I've talked about this before in great detail, especially on, I think, the first episode of Braxcast Live, the religious overtones, especially the, I would say, biblical overtones, with the story of Cain and Abel being depicted at the very beginning of Bloodroof number 1, and that leading into, the cursed and cursed bloodline, and of course you have this not say extreme dependence, but just this focus on Bloodroof's character being around the Christian life. Of course, you look at this iconography there, of course you see Christ with the halo. It's very typical of iconography, it being broken through, her not being able to be attacked by the church. And of course, this is one of the things that the Saskas mention, and I'm not sure, I will try and zoom in here. You guys can see, of course, you've got an icon here of the baby Jesus with Mary, and one of the things they mention, I think on one of the first Rippaverse roundtable, and they're still doing those. They're really cool that they still do those. I think one of the first ones where they're talking about, I believe it was Bloodroof, getting into Bloodroof spoiler talk, is that the demons, they hate the name of Mary. She is, of course, the Queen of Heaven. That is the very traditional view of Mary, the Theotokos God-bearer. And on that basis, she is the Queen of Heaven. That's the Jewish king tradition. If you read Chronicles, you'll notice that every king is introduced alongside the name of his mother, the Queen Mother. So the mother of the king is a very important figure in ancient Jewish tradition, and since Jesus is the king of the universe, he's the king of the Jews, mockingly called in the Gospels, Mary has a very important role, and because of her important role as Queen of the universe, that means she is very much in opposition to the devils, and I would say the Saskas, having that Catholic viewpoint, do a really good job at depicting that later in the book of Bloodroof. And all that to say is that having Bloodroof's character and Yaira's character cross over, especially since the Saskas are writing both of these characters, would make a lot of sense to me, is that there isn't like a lot of, these characters aren't ridiculously grounded, right? Or I say they aren't the grounded street level characters in the same way that someone like Horseman is. Like Horseman crossing over with Bloodroof or Yaira and having all this like supernatural, fantastical stuff go on, that's much more of a harder sell to people. But to me, having Yaira and Bloodroof crossover and having some supernatural event go down seems to be a much more reasonable thing to do. And of course, it's going to be I think a really good avenue to really explore the most interesting motifs with these characters, being their supernatural elements, being the fact that, of course, Yaira's got all the things going on with Neptune, of course, with Neptune, and of course, you know, all the beings that she's been involved with, whether those are the alien beings, whether that's her history with Gorm and the Norse. Got the Norse, I guess the Scandinavian people, and you could have, you know, putting into the Norse gods. We know Valadon, I think, has, you know, Norse mythology or Norse mythological origins. So you could have Norse mythology mixed in with the biblical history, mixed in with the alien, and of course the Greek mythology. Of course, you've got Neptune. Of course, these could be, you know, all the same source of supernatural divinity in the Rippaverse, right? And that gives us an insight of the angles that's it is presented to. Of course, that's a very much not the way any of these worldviews work in reality, but of course, this being a comic book universe, having them all be part of the same source would be an interesting thing, and them being different angles of how they're revealed to the reader would be an interesting thing, and having a Yaira and Bloodroof crossover will be a way to give the reader more insight into how that works, and especially with the fact that we have Bloodroof ending with, if I can show it to you guys, if I can show what I'm talking about, is that the very last page, of course, you know, we've got Dokuman. He says it's all going to happen in Florence Park, that you're going to have these actions set into motion, or the actions have set into motion consequences of a cosmic scale that cannot be stopped. It will all happen in Florence Park. So, of course, you're going to have this cosmic event that the Rippaverse is going to be slowly building up to. And if I can zoom back out there, if you guys were able to see that, my entire point is that I'm making is that the first event is going to involve Dokuman in some sense, or at least Dokuman is going to know about it and it's going to be this event on a cosmic scale that takes place in Forest Park. And to build up to that, I think a really good thing would be to have Yaira and Bloodruth, because Yaira's got access to the cosmic and supernatural, and Bloodruth's got the access to the supernatural and the ability to travel realms, right? So I think you could have a really interesting story that's grounded in the relative to both of their characters. It doesn't break anything for both of their storylines, and gets the reader on the way to that first big event happening. Like I said, I will think happen around 27, 28, sometime after the 5-year anniversary of the Rippaverse as a company. But that's all I have for you guys today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode of the Braxcast. I'm sure there's going to be much more for me to talk about, because they are really good about releasing stuff over at the Rippaverse, and they've got so much in the pipeline. Of course, we didn't even know about Yaira Free. It's out for pre-order now. Of course, we have Golden Patriot. I believe that's over $60,000, 2,000 books sold. So the fans are really having a blast with not only Rippaverse, but Ripascend as well. And I will be covering all of that goodness and all of that fantastic comic book, all the fantastic comic books are getting released, and all the stuff that the fans love to nerd out about on the Braxcast. So be sure to stay tuned to that. Joker is out. Thank you for tuning in to the Braxcast. Be sure to like, comment, follow, and subscribe to keep up with the Rippaverse.